Welcome to our audio editing tutorial. Today we'll be using a program called Audacity, which is a free audio recording program, and I will provide a link to where you can download that in our course materials on Moodle. Now I'll give you a tour around and I'll show you how we can put together something akin to a news package. I will say, as with most programs, most of the general principles here will translate just fine if you're used to another program such as GarageBand. But of course, some of the particular terminology and the specific controls might be unique to Audacity. So here we go. Of course, up top you'll see all of the traditional menus that you're used to seeing in most programs. And then here you will find what's known as the transport. This essentially is your playback controls and recording controls. Here you have your tools for selecting and editing tracks once we've either recorded or imported them. And then you've got tools for editing down along the bottom. Up top, you'll see a monitoring volume level. And if I click here, this is really useful because now you can see the level at which you're recording, which means if you get too loud and it starts clipping, you can back off on your input volume using the slider over here. You see the microphone, this is your input volume, and you can slide it down. If I bring it up, you'll see that I'm way too high and I'm clipping. What that means is basically anything that gets that red line and gets all the way up to the top is going to have that really artifacty, artificial, robot-y, crackly, popping sound that's really awful and distorted sounding. You want to avoid that. So a good rule of thumb is drag this down to about halfway, and you want to try and make sure that your levels are about 3/4 of the way up. So you can test it out. If you need to bring it up a little bit, you can, and if you need to bring it down a little bit, you can, of course. And then this is our output. So our output volume is here, and our output volume controls are here, which means the playback will be louder or softer depending on how much this is scrolled. Underneath we have some of the settings for what devices you'll be using to either record or play back your microphone or your speakers. Most of these will be fine by default, but if you have multiple options, you can choose between them by selecting from this drop-down. And here, of course, mono versus stereo. Mono being it will be one sound that comes through one channel that will go in both of your ears. Stereo being two channels, one for your left ear, one for your right ear. Stereo is definitely your best bet here. It just gives you more options for a fuller sort of surround sound possibility. And of course, here's your output, your speakers. Now then, we'll begin by recording something. The recording controls are up here on the transport, and you're going to click record and it will automatically create a new track. Alternatively, you can go up to tracks, add new, and you can choose between a mono track or a stereo track. I'll choose a stereo track. Now you'll see here, this is the track that our audio is going to be recorded on. All the track controls are on the left, and you'll see as soon as we start recording, a waveform of that audio will come up here. So let's assume that we're doing a journalistic news package. We go out to the field, and the first thing we'll probably want to do is record some audio with our sources. So in my best acting voice, I will record the source audio of a kindly old man who will help us put our story together. My name is Eustace, and I've lived here my whole life. I've never seen anything like it. It just came zooming on in, and there I was, running around yelling, "Help! Help!" So just then I stopped recording by pressing the space bar, and that allowed me to cut it off when I was done. And if I wanted to hear back what I played, you can click at any point to set the playhead, and then press space. And I've lived here my whole life. I've never seen anything like it. And you can see what you've just recorded. Now you'll see here we have what's called a waveform. And this is essentially the sound frequencies that you're hearing. And you can zoom in using this tool, and you'll see that it really is actually the sine waves going back and forth. And you can zoom in so far that you can see every little tiny click of the sound recording. And you can actually use a tool, this pen here, this draw tool, to move each individual point of this around. I find that to be completely useless, but it is an option. So, speaking of zooming, we may want to fit our entire selection to the width of our screen. So if I go and select an area and hit this, it will zoom that to the screen. We can also zoom out in order to fit the entire project to the width. So now, for example, if I wanted to only look at this spot right here, I might want to fit that to my screen, and now that spot is zoomed in to fit my entire screen. And of course you can zoom in or out incrementally with the plus or minus. Now, of course, you may have noticed that in order to select this, I had to use a different tool. So our first tool here is the selection tool. And the selection tool allows you to position your playhead, and also if you drag, it allows you to select an area. This will come in handy for copying and pasting, for cutting, for moving things around. If you want to move things around, you can use this tool, the time shift tool. I'm going to zoom out so that you can see a little bit extra. If I wanted to move this whole clip around, I could click this time shift tool and slide this left or right. And now, anywhere in my timeline, this can be positioned. All right, we'll put that back at the beginning. So that's your selection tool and your time shift tool. You'll see these other tools as well, and we already covered the draw tool, which again is pretty much useless except for the most technical of usages, which you won't have to worry about. We'll cover this tool later. It's called the envelope tool. We'll come back to that when we talk about volume. You can zoom in and out, same as these buttons using this tool. And this is the multi-tool, which allows you to have different controls depending on where you're positioning your tool. So if it's up here, it's a selection tool. If I come in here, it becomes the envelope tool. And so it's sort of the Swiss Army knife of tools. I generally tend to keep it on the selection tool because that tends to get the job done. Now I'm going to zoom this back to fit my whole window. Now, say there was a chunk of this recording that I didn't want to keep. Maybe this chunk right here. There are a few ways to get rid of something you've recorded. The easiest way is to simply highlight it by clicking and dragging, and then press the delete key on your keyboard. Now you'll notice that this not only got rid of that, but it also slid over everything in order to close the gap so that you don't have that space empty on your timeline. One of the things to note is that this is what's known as a destructive edit. By destructive, I mean it cannot be recovered. It cannot be undone. If I keep working, there is no way to now bring that back. The only way to bring it back is really quickly after I realize I've made the mistake to use the back button. This is the undo button, which is the typical Control-Z or Command-Z on your keyboard. So I can press that or Command-Z and get it back so that I have not made that grievous error. On the other hand, if I wanted to get rid of it but maintain the space here and just have it be silent instead of sound, I can use these trim tools. This tool here trims all of the audio outside of the selection. So if I click it, everything except what is selected gets removed. But you'll notice the time is still here. We just have however many seconds of empty space, and then the recording, and then more empty space here. I'm going to Command-Z and undo. The other option is to use this silence tool, which is the opposite. It has now created silence here, and you can see if I were to play this back,
my whole life,
we have silence in this space.
it just came zooming on in, and there I was running.
Again, this is a destructive edit. If I zoom in here, no amount of zooming will show that there's anything there to work with. It is flatlined entirely. So I'm going to bring it back because I don't want that either. If you wanted to actually make it recoverable, that's where you start to use this envelope tool. Now if I click the envelope tool, you'll see a bar in here appear. This bar is basically your volume level, and you can click to create a node. And if I click where I want it to start and stop, you can see I can shrink it down, and I can make it lower, or I can make it higher. This is effectively increasing or decreasing the volume, the envelope of this section. And so if I were to keep dragging this down, this is effectively silenced. Just as we had before. However, if I go back with my envelope tool, I can pull this back up and all that data is still there. So it is non-destructive. This is really useful if you don't want to do something permanently because you might have regrets later. Now then, I'm going to bring this back to normal how it was before. Command Z, Command Z. So now we've covered the vast majority of these tools here. We've got the selection tool, the envelope tool for controlling volume in a non-destructive way, the draw tool for who knows what, the zoom tool, the time shift tool for sliding your piece left or right in the timeline, and the multi-tool, which gives you a little bit of all of those depending on where your cursor is positioned. Here we have cut, copy, and paste. Your typical command or control X, C, and V, which is the same on any program you may use, will work just as well. If you want to copy and paste or cut and paste any region here, you can do that. Alright, so now I've got my source recorded, and I'm going to want to try and figure out how to turn this into a journalistic package, so I'll need the reporter to write in and out of these audio sound bites, which means I'll need a new track. So I'm going to create a new track, add new, stereo track, and I'm going to name these by going down here and changing their name to source and reporter. This will just help me keep it a little bit more organized. You can obviously change this to whatever suits your project best. And now if I were to start recording on this track, I would hear this playing back as I recorded, which will ultimately end up in this getting recorded in this track as well and create a feedback loop, and that's no good. So I will probably, unless I'm using headphones, I will probably want to mute this track. And you can see these controls on the left come in handy for that sort of thing. Mute will make this track inaudible while you use other tracks. Solo, on the other hand, mutes everything except that track. You also have track-wide controls for volume and for panning. If I want the entire track to be louder, I can turn the gain up or down using this knob. Now this will not help if you only have a portion that is too quiet, because this will affect the entire track. You also have the pan left and right. If you want this to be all the way panned to the left ear, this channel, which represents the left ear, will be louder than this channel, which is in your right ear. Conversely, pan it to the right, now this channel will be very quiet and this channel will be very loud. That will have the effect of sitting it in your right ear or your left ear if you're using headphones or surround sound speakers or anything of that sort. Now then, I'm going to record my reporter. So I'm going to bring my playhead back to the beginning, I'm going to mute the other track, and I'm going to record my reporter. Thank you, Eric. Jet Newsley here, reporting from the middle of the woods, where what experts are calling a catastrophic celestial event has rocked the area. We've met one of the locals, an admittedly strange but endearing elderly person. It was a sheltered existence, until one day. The locals never saw it coming, and that's when it happened. We'll report with more as the story develops. Back to you, Eric. Alright, so that may not make a whole lot of sense yet, but basically I had gone through and decided where I wanted to write in to a clip and write out of a clip from what the source had said, and these are the chunks that I'm going to be using. Of course, a reporter is no good without an anchor to introduce them, so I will record an anchor piece next. put in a new track, a stereo track. I'm going to name this Anchor. Going to mute both of these tracks, and I'm going to start recording my anchor bits. You're listening to the St. Elizabeth News Hour, the finest in hacked together, hastily edited audio we hope no one outside of this class ever hears. As always, I'm your host Eric Velosin. We take you now to humdrum news correspondent Jet Newsley in middle of nowhere, USA, with an unfolding crisis. Jet? Thank you, Jet. This has been Eric Velosin for the St. Elizabeth News Hour, and this is my really impressive signature sign-off. And remember, please, don't show this to anyone. Alright, so now we've got our anchor portion recorded, and we can start manipulating our tracks. I'm going to set this to our width of our screen so it's a little easier to work with. You can also change the size of your tracks to make them a little bit easier to see on the screen. Now I'm going to unmute my tracks, and I'm going to solo the one I want to work with, and I'm going to cut this into a few different pieces.
My name is Eustace, and I've lived here my whole life.
Now maybe I want to split there, so I'm going to split here by going to Edit, Clip Boundaries, Split. Now the easier way to do this is Command-I or Control-I if you're on a PC. And that now has created two independent clips that I can move around. And then I'm going to go over here.
I've never seen anything like it.
And I'm going to split it here as well. I'll just Command-I. Now, if I use my time shift tool, I can grab this and move it around, and you can see it's an independent clip. So now I can start cutting this together into different parts. Alright, so now, if we listen through, we have a sufficient edit of our sound clip.
You're listening to the St. Elizabeth News Hour, the finest in hacked together, hastily edited audio we hope no one outside of this class ever hears. As always, I'm your host Eric Velosin. We take you now to humdrum news correspondent Jet Newsley in middle of nowhere, USA, with an unfolding crisis. Jet? Thank you, Eric. Jet Newsley here, reporting from the middle of the woods, where what experts are calling a catastrophic celestial event has rocked the area. We've met one of the locals, an admittedly strange but endearing elderly person. My name is Eustace, and I've lived here my whole life. It was a sheltered existence, until one day. I've never seen anything like it. The locals never saw it coming, and that's when it happened. It just came zooming on in, and there I was, running around yelling, "Help! Help!" We'll report with more as the story develops. Back to you, Eric. Thank you, Jet. This has been Eric Velosin for the St. Elizabeth News Hour, and this is my really impressive signature sign-off. And remember, please, don't show this to anyone.
Alright, so that would suffice, but we can certainly spice it up a little bit more. For example, we can add in some sound effects and other sounds of our own. Perhaps we have some actualities that we want to include, such as natural sound or background music or any other sound bites. So, the first thing we can do is simply import a file. And you can do that two ways. The first way is to go to File, Import, Audio, and select what audio file you want to use. And for this purpose, I'm going to use the 7th Symphony file that I have here. And when you open it, it is going to put it in at the bottom. And if we solo it, you can see we've got music. So maybe this is our intro music for our show. So we'll have it come in. And then we'll have all of our other parts come in over top of it. So we're going to select everything else that we've recorded and drag it to where we want it to start. So maybe here at this part where I introduce myself, I want to have the music fade out. So if I want it to be done by, say, here, I'm going to click there, I'm going to split the track, and I'm going to delete everything on this side of it. And of course, one way we can do that is by selecting it and hitting delete. Now I can create this fade out effect a few ways. One way is to use the envelope tool as we saw before. So maybe I want this section right in here to start fading out. So I'm going to go up to my envelope tool, and then just for good measure I will zoom in on this portion here. And now with my envelope tool selected, I'm going to create anchor points, and I'm going to just drag this down, and you can kind of ramp it down that way. You can control exactly how much and when it tapers off. I find this to be honestly pretty cumbersome, so I recommend a second way of doing this. I'm going to Command-Z to undo this. I'm going to simply highlight the portion that I want to fade out, and I'm going to go to Effect, Fade Out. Ta-da!
As always, I'm your host, Eric Velosin. We take you now to Humdrum.
And we have an effective fade out. You of course also can fade in if you want to, fade in. The effects menu is going to be a really useful time saver rather than having to create effects from scratch using the tools. You can use these plugins to create the effect for you. So now we've got three ways that we can manipulate the levels. We've got the entire track levels, which will affect the entire recording on this track. We've got the envelope tool, which will allow us to dynamically move pieces of the track. And we've got effects such as fade in and fade out. There's another effect that you can use which will allow you to change the level overall of just a region or a selection. If you've selected an area, as I have over here, you can use the Amplify tool, the first one up here, and this will allow you to control how much this gets boosted or subtracted, and you can even preview, as long as you don't go beyond the bounds of what is possible for the speakers, you can preview So that's another way that you can get a little bit more control over a specific section. I'm going to cancel that. Alright, so maybe I want to add some natural sound to give this more of a realistic feel. For example, this reporter is reporting from the middle of nowhere, so maybe we need some middle of nowhere sound effects, some natural sound. So I'm going to go in and I'm going to import. Now I showed you how you can go to File, Import. You can also just drag and drop. So here I have this jungle sound effect, and I'm just going to drag it over onto my timeline, and I'm just going to drop it in, and it automatically creates a track for it. Excellent. So that track will come in handy. I'm going to move it over after my reporter starts talking, because he's in the middle of nowhere.
With an unfolding crisis. Jet, Thank you, Eric. Jet Newsley here, reporting from the middle of the woods, where what experts are calling a catastrophic celestial event has rocked the area. We've met one of the
Of course, we want this to extend through our entire sound, so maybe we need to copy and paste this. And this is a very useful feature because you can select what you want to copy and paste, and then use either this copy function or Command C, Control C, and we'll just go right to the end of it and hit Command V. And now we've got it back to back. And we're just going to keep copying and pasting. Now, of course, we're going to end up with a slight problem because you can hear, if it restarts,
has rocked the area. We've met one of the
you can hear that click where it restarts. So we're going to want to make this a little bit smoother of a transition. So I'm going to highlight this transition and I'm going to crossfade it. And again, you can do this manually with the envelopes tool, but it's really, really frustrating. So we just go over to Effects, Crossfade Clips. If you have these on multiple tracks, you can crossfade the tracks together, but we have it on one track, so we're going to crossfade the clips together. And you can see it has smoothed over that boundary. And if I start here, it's a seamless transition. We're going to do this over all of these. And we'll add a fade in. And when we figure out when we want to end it, we will add a fade out. Alright, so I'm going to push all of these things over a little bit just to help them fit a little bit better. And it might make sense for this track to be more noticeable underneath the source speaking than our reporter speaking, so I might want to do something called ducking. And ducking is when you reduce the sound of a clip in order to duck underneath another clip that's playing at the same time. And so one way you can do this is, of course, anytime you want it to duck, you can just manually with the envelope tool have it duck down, come back up, duck down, come back up. But there's an easier way to do this. There's an actual ducking tool. If I click on this track, I can go to Effect, Auto Duck. And what you'll notice is if I click it, it will give me a message saying that it needs a control track which must be placed below the selected track. What that means is I need to place this on top of whatever I want it to duck under. So I'm going to move this whole track up until it is just above the track that I want it to duck under. I want it to duck underneath my reporter, so I'm going to have it sitting on top of the reporter. Just for good measure, I'm going to put my other tracks out of the way here so that it doesn't get confused and duck under anything else. Alright, so I'm going to duck this track. I'm going to select this track, and then I'm going to go to Effect, Auto Duck, and now instead of giving me the warning, it gives me this, which shows the volume levels anytime that there is something in this reporter track making sound. So let's give it a try. You'll see it got quieter anytime this other track started, and if we listen to it...
Thank you, Eric. Jet Newsley here, reporting from the middle of the woods, where...
Much better. And now anytime our source speaks, it'll amplify again.
Elderly person. My name is Eustace.
Which gives us a nice sort of natural feel. Now there are plenty of other really cool effects that you can use. In fact, there's a whole menu of them. I won't go through all of them, but I will show you just a few that are particularly useful. For instance, so I'm going to go ahead and drag in a bomb sound effect. This is the catastrophic celestial event that our reporter had mentioned. If you get this warning, all it means is, do you want to make a new copy of the file you're importing into a folder specific for this project, or do you want to simply read the file from its original folder? This will be faster, but you'll lose it if you move that file. For now, I'm just going to say OK. So here we have our bomb sound. Now you'll notice that it's clipping, and of course you could change the track volume, or you could use the envelope tool, or you could use the effect amplify in order to make it louder or softer. But moral of the story is, no matter how loud or soft I make it, the original soundbite here clips. There's nothing that I can do to recover that sound, which is why it's so important to get a good recorded quality sound first. This is just the way that clip's going to be. It'll be louder or softer, but it will still have that clipping sound. So we just have to deal with it. Now I'm going to move this in place, and then we're going to do some things with it. Alright, so I'm going to plop it in for now, right after...
And that's when it happened.
I might want this to be a little more dramatic. So I'm going to have this actually take a little bit of a longer time by changing this track's speed. And I'm going to do that by going up to Effect, Change Tempo. Now if you change speed, you're going to get the Chipmunks effect, where if I want something to go faster, it'll start sounding like this, and then or it's going to slow down and make it sound really awful. So I'm going to do tempo, which will keep the pitch intact, but it will change the speed, the duration of the clip. So I'm going to change tempo, and I'm going to change it either by a certain percent or a certain length. So I'm just going to make it, I don't know, that much slower, from 4 seconds to, say, 9 seconds. It'll be roughly twice as slow. So now it'll be a little bit more dramatic. Much better. And I'm going to fade out the clip at the end so that it has a nice tail at the end. Now, what if I wanted to give the effect of this actually traveling from left ear to right ear? Some programs like GarageBand actually have a way to automate the panning just the way that you would using the envelope tool, where you can make part of it pan to one side and part of it pan to the other side. Audacity doesn't have that ability, it can only pan the entire track. So what I can do is I can duplicate this track by copying and pasting onto a new track. I'm going to add a new track. This is in mono, so I'm going to make it mono. And I'm going to Command copy, put my playhead right there, Command paste, make sure that they're lined up with each other. And then I'm going to assign this one to the left ear and this one to the right ear. So I've essentially created a stereo track, but it's broken up into 2 tracks. Then I'm going to take my entire left ear and I'm going to fade it out. And I'm going to take my entire right ear and I'm going to fade it in. And what this does is it effectively pans from your left ear to your right ear. And you can hear that it now sounds like it's zooming across your aural space from your left ear to your right ear and exploding out there. Now let me put my pieces back into place here. And now I know that I've got the entire duration of my project where I'd like it, so I'm going to trim this piece right here. So now my jungle will fade out after my reporter is done and kicks it back to our anchor up here. And of course, if I wanted to, I can put my theme song music back in. I'm going to highlight that, Command C, in order to copy. So I'm going to have it come back in right over here, Command V. Maybe I'll move it over just a hair. Now, last but not least, I will probably want to make my really impressive sounding signature sign-off sound a little more really impressive. And there's a lot of things you can do to make your audio sound more impressive. We won't go into the details of these, but know that under your effects, you can do things like equalization, which is where you change what frequencies are higher or lower in the mix in order to bring out the good sounds of a clip and hide the bad sounding sounds of a clip. You can also add compression, which is when it takes the softest sounds and makes them louder, and the loudest sounds and makes them softer, so it sort of brings everything into a closer range in the middle. And you can do things like add reverb. So I'm going to add some reverb to my anchor clip right when I say my signature sign out. And you can actually change what size room you want it to be in, and all of the other settings for how it sounds, and you can preview it.
Really impressive signature sign-off.
So I'll hit OK there, and then just for kicks, maybe I'll play around just to have fun, change the pitch, and I'm going to make me a little bit of more of a bass.
Really impressive signature sign-off.
There. Alright, that ought to sound pretty impressive. So let's listen to our final product before I show you one last trick that may come in handy if you aren't in a controlled environment while you're recording. Without further ado, I give you our news broadcast.
You're listening to the St. Elizabeth News Hour, the finest in hacked-together, hastily edited audio we hope no one outside of this class ever hears. As always, I'm your host, Eric Velosin. We take you now to humdrum news correspondent Jet Newsley in middle of nowhere, USA, with an unfolding crisis. Jet? Thank you, Eric. Jet Newsley here, reporting from the middle of the woods, where what experts are calling a catastrophic celestial event has rocked the area. We've met one of the locals, an admittedly strange but endearing elderly person.
My name is Eustace, and I've lived here my whole life.
It was a sheltered existence, until one day,
I've never seen anything like it.
the locals never saw it coming, and that's when it happened.
It just came zooming on in, and there I was, running around yelling, "Help! Help!"
We'll report with more as the story develops. Back to you, Eric. Thank you, Jet. This has been Eric Velosin for the St. Elizabeth News Hour, and this is my
Really impressive signature sign-off.
And remember, please, don't show this to anyone.
There you have it. Now, if you are not so fortunate to have a controlled recording environment and you end up with some background noise, there is a way to get rid of it. But it's important to know that if you have background noise, you have to have a sample of just the background noise in order for the computer to know what to get rid of. Which means if you are recording someone and you know you're next to a babbling brook or a noisy fountain or a plane flying by, or I don't know, something to that effect, make sure you record a few seconds of just that babbling brook, just that noise. So allow me to simulate some white noise here. Alright, so now I've artificially created my background noise, which sounds like this. Your typical white noise, and I've created my audio track.
This is what I wish I could record, but I can't because there's noise.
And just for the purposes of this demonstration, I'm going to show you how to merge these two tracks. So I'm going to select these two tracks, and I'm going to go to Tracks, Mix, Mix and Render. And now I've created one track, which essentially is just, for our purposes, simulating having a really bad recording, and it sounds a little something like this.
This is what I wish I could record, but I can't because there's noise.
So if you record and you end up with this situation where you have background noise that you wish you could eliminate, there is a way to do this. First, what you have to do is you have to select a portion that just has the noise itself. Then go up to Effects, Noise Reduction, and you're going to say Get Noise Profile. This is allowing the computer to find what's the thing you want to get rid of. Now that it has gotten that selection, that sample, you'll select the entire thing that you want to reduce, and you'll go up to the same thing, Effect, Noise Reduction, and you can try and bring it down even more, or you can change the sensitivity so that it's more or less sensitive, and give this a try.
This is what I wish I could record, but I can't because there's noise.
Now you'll notice it changed the timbre of the voice itself a bit, but it's much better than having a distracting white noise humming in the background. So this is an option for you as long as you're able to record a sample of just that white noise to get the profile from. Alright, we're going to delete that track because we have our perfectly good tracks here that we want to export, which brings us to our final topic. Exporting your project. If you hit save, you're going to save the project as an Audacity project, and someone will have to have Audacity in order to open it. So what you want to do in order to share this is to export as either an MP3 or a WAV file. Now this brings us to a discussion of file types. As we talked about with image editing, and as we will talk about again with video editing, file types can be lossy or lossless. WAV is a lossless format. It's going to be a larger file size, and it's going to retain all of the information that the audio contains without compressing or getting rid of any of it. And if we select WAV, we have a pretty simple interface where you type in what you want it to be saved as, where you want to save it, and you can choose between all of the different versions of WAV here. I would recommend that you just stick to WAV, 16-bit, so just stick with the default and you're probably fine, and you'll just hit save and it will render this out, and then you will have an audio file that you can just plug in to whatever platform you are sharing this on. Alternatively, you can save your project, export your project as an MP3. And this is going to be lossy, meaning it's compressed. It's creating a smaller file size in order to make it more compatible and more shareable, but it's going to lose some of the audio quality. Generally speaking, not enough to really care. So MP3s are kind of the standard go-to file format. And here again, you'll have this typical interface, and you can choose between, again, the same variations here. AIFF is another variation of compression that is pretty useful if you have Apple users, because it also supports album artwork and more full tags that might be useful for iTunes or something like that. So if we're going with the much more widely accepted MP3 files, there are a few things that you want to just be aware of. The first thing you'll want to be aware of is this bitrate. Bitrate is basically the rate at which the data that makes up the sound is handled. If you're going to be streaming this audio online, then you'll want to go with constant. That means that the data is going to be streamed at a constant rate. That will allow for less stuttering and more accurate playback. Otherwise, though, you'll want to go with variable. And the variable bitrate will allow it to vary how much or little data is conveyed at any given time, to allow for better compression. So you're going to have a smaller file size. So as long as you're not streaming, if you're going to make it available for download or you're going to burn it to one of those archaic things like a CD, then variable is the way to go. In which case, you'll want to also know your quality settings. The minimum quality recommended for music, which would be the highest quality that you'll want, because music tends to have much more subtlety than, say, speech, is going to be 128 up to 320. So anywhere in this 128 to 320 is going to be sufficient. So this preset is going to be just fine for most applications. If you have less sophisticated sound, you can always go smaller, and it's going to be a smaller file size, but you're going to not have the depth of quality. Now you can choose between a standard speed or a fast speed. Basically, this is just how long it will take to render, which is negligible in most cases to start out with, so it doesn't really matter. Standard is going to take a little bit longer, but who cares? It's a better quality. You can go have a sandwich. So we're going to leave it at sandwich. We're going to leave it at standard. Can you tell I'm hungry? And channel mode. Obviously, if you have stereo, you're going to want stereo audio selected. So we'll leave it at stereo. Stereo gives you the most wide range of options. Now you'll notice if I hit save here, this is going to give me an error message. And all this is Audacity needs a plugin in order to create MP3s. You can download this plugin if you want, I just have not. So don't worry too much for our assignments purposes. If you cannot make it an MP3, you can send me a WAV file and that is totally fine. But know that in the real world, MP3s are much more useful and much more widely accepted than waves. So we're going to cancel that, and we're going to export this as a WAV file instead of an MP3 and skirt the whole issue, and we'll go along our way. And this is just saying your tracks will be mixed down and exported as one stereo file, meaning that instead of having a whole slew of individual tracks, you'll just hear it all together. Okay. If you were to endeavor to put this up on iTunes, this is a great way to enter some metadata where you can put in the artist name, the track name, etc., especially in terms of search engine optimization or just user friendliness. You can have more information attached to the metadata of your audio. And voila, we are done. Let's check it out.
You're listening to the
And there you
St.
go,
Elizabeth
your
News
audio
Hour, the
file
finest in-
that you can share and drag and drop and email and upload and do whatever else you want with. Congratulations, and thank you for listening to this tutorial, and I hope you have good luck with your own audio editing. Enjoy, get creative, and let me know if you have any questions. Take care.